But both of them vehemently opposed the idea of Meg and Harry taking any legal action, and he couldn't understand why. Well, I'll tell you why. Because a letter that you're not ashamed of is nothing to sue over. It may be an inconvenience to you. You may dislike the fact that it had been handed over to the press because it feels like an intrusion. But again, you expected that would happen. So if you expected it, then why are you suing over it? If you didn't want that to happen, then why did you feed something to the beast? That doesn't make sense. And again, a letter that you're not ashamed of is completely different than Catherine without a top on. Those are not the same circumstances, and you cannot equate the two. And no one will ever side with you and be like, oh, that's really unfair that William was allowed to sue the paper over topless photos of Catherine, yet you can't sue over a letter that you aren't ashamed of. Good morning, how are you? Welcome to another episode of I'll Spare You the Details. We're going through Prince Harry's Spare, and we're reading it. Every word of it. We are not skimming over anything. I have read every single page of this, and together we have come a far way. We're almost done. Thank the Lord. In this section, this third section that we've been in, it's been all about Meghan and Harry. It's been all about their love story, and then their wedding, and then them trying to get pregnant. And now, last episode, we talked about how things are not going well. They are feeling a lot of pressure and disdain. They feel like the tide is turning against Meghan really significantly. Like before, Harry says it was all about the fact that she was black and that everybody didn't like her because they were racist. And now the narrative switching to, well, we just don't like her because we think she's a big bitch. He that's what he said. He can't understand why anybody is saying any of these things. So tempers were rising in the last chapter. People were getting upset. Harry was on defense mode. They're trying to get pregnant. It's just a lot. Last episode was a lot. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, because it was like, oh my gosh, these people. Anyway, we're gonna run into this material today. I don't have a long intro, but I do want to say one other thing. I read the comments, and a lot of people mention this one specific instance that I talked about last episode and didn't feel like I gave it the full color that I should have, and I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know what I was thinking, because even when I read it, I thought, oh, there's more here, but I don't know, maybe I was feeling lazy and I don't know what it is. But when everybody pointed out to me what the problem was, I thought, you know what, you're right. And that instance is when Harry and Meghan get back from their honeymoon and they go to the Trooping of the Color. It's like one of their first engagements as newlyweds. And Meghan and Catherine are standing there together. Catherine says, what do you think of your first Trooping of the Color? And Meg's response is, colorful. And it says, a yawning silence followed. And I said, well, big deal. And the thing is that truly, big deal. But if we are here to analyze why that would have been offensive, it's certainly, I don't understand why Harry included it, because it makes Meghan look like a real big jerk. Here, Catherine is trying to engage her in conversation and discuss the day's events and see what she thinks about this historic event. And Meghan's dismissive and shallow comment back is colorful. It ends conversation. So I had said, who cares? Let's move on. Well, to me, I say that because it's like, what kind of incident is that? If you've only got one book and you've got to write about all the things that have happened that have led to this complete and total dismantling of your family, I would expect it to be like a lot of bombshells. Like, whoa, I can't believe that happened. And your big concern is that Catherine didn't know what to say after Meghan cut her off. So I didn't go way into it, but a lot of people were saying, Meghan really came off pretty badly in that exchange. And of course there was yawning silence because Meghan was so rude. Well, yes, I agree. But I think a finer point to put on it would be, why would Harry include a story in which his wife just doesn't look good? And I think that's the thing that really shocks me about so much of this, is everything that he says about her is shocking to me, because as he tries to defend her, all he ends up doing is convincing us of everybody else's thoughts on it. Like, if he's trying to tell us Meghan was this lovely person and you never met a nicer person, and then he continues to tell us episodes in which she's short with people, rude with people, it makes it all the more convincing that she's the one who wrote this section of the book, because she doesn't think there's anything wrong with the way she talks. She doesn't even feel like she needs to recast it in a different light. You know, I think back to the story about the tiara when Catherine calls and says, you know, these dresses aren't going to work, and I'm trying to tell you that it's not going to work. And Meghan's response in the text is, and I'm telling you to go back and to Kensington Palace and go to the tailor. I'm telling you. It's like, well, that's not the right tone. And so it's just surprising to me how many times he writes about the things that Meghan says. Get your finger out of my face, she says to William. Like, what are these? What in the world? This is not the way to write about somebody that you're trying to convince all of us is actually a super nice person. Let's just get into it because we've got a lot to cover today. But thank you for pointing out that there, you know, it was kind of a mean exchange. I still think it's ridiculous to have added that into your memoir. You got one chance to tell everybody your story and that's what you include? Okay. All right. Oh yeah, then of course, like, comment, and subscribe. We left off last time. They've told everybody that they're pregnant at Eugenie's wedding. So that's really shocking because it's so tacky. You don't announce your pregnancy at somebody's wedding. You can tell people that at any time. You can tell them the very next day. Why do you have to upstage her event? Okay, so after they get done with that tacky move, we come to, now it's time to announce the pregnancy. And Harry wants you to know that the papers were saying that Meg was battling fatigue and dizzy spells and she couldn't hold any food down, but actually she was totally fine and walking around just fine. So, you know, she was a real dynamo, he says. And I mean, this was lucky because they were embarking on their greatest tour of all time. So it's good that she wasn't dragging everybody down with her sickness. He claims that when they went to Australia and Fiji and New Zealand, she just dazzled everyone. Dazzled, that's his word. And in fact, at one rousing speech, she even got a standing ovation. Well, yeah, because people didn't hate her at this point. I mean, I know he claims everybody did. Now, I think some people had, like, were beginning to give her the side eye, especially after some things had come out about the wedding. But I don't even think we quite knew that just yet. I think that kind of came a little after the wedding. Anyway, then he tells her this bewildering statement. He tells her, "You're doing too well, my love. Too damn well. You're making it look too easy. This is how everything started with my mother." Oh God, his mother again. Can you imagine being married to somebody who, his mother's dead, and yet you can't even get away? Every minute of the day, he's always talking about my mummy this and my mummy that. I think it's odd he keeps calling her his mummy. Anyway, whatever. But what a real Debbie Downer. I mean, was he jealous or what's going on here? You can't stand that everybody hates her. You freak out that the papers are writing ugly things about her. When she gets a standing ovation, you toddle over and say, "You're doing too damn well, my love." Well, what do you want? What do you want, Harry? You want to be upset. That's what you want. And then this bewildering statement, yet another bewildering statement. He goes, "Maybe I sounded mad, paranoid, but everyone knew that Mummy's situation went from bad to worse when she showed the world, showed the family, that she was better at touring, better at connecting with people, better at being royal than she had any right to be." Than she had any right to be? Look, you fool. You don't know who your mother was. She was a Spencer. She was of this ilk. Look, what are you talking about? Like, these were her people. She had any right to be? What? What are you talking about? They invited Diana in to the family. She was hand-selected. They wanted her because they thought she would be good at the job. They thought that she could do it. They wanted her because she was, you know, this young virginal beauty that they could hopefully train and teach how to be this royal person. Like, had any right to? What are you talking about? Now, Meghan, you could say, okay, well, it's a little, as an American outsider, all right, okay, maybe. People could be surprised that she would do well at the job just because what does she know and who really is she? No one ever thought either one of you had it, and you can't, you know, suddenly show your cards now. What are you talking about, Harry? Do you not know who your mother was? That was not some sort of sad little Cinderella story where they plucked her up out of obscurity, you know, out of the dustbin of society and raised her to new heights, and then shocker, she did extraordinarily well and people loved her. Your mother came from somewhere, okay? It's not a nobody. Anyway, then he goes on to say that it was just this wonderful, jubilant situation because for once, not a negative word was written. But of course, that wasn't likely to stay. It all changed. Oh, how it changed. Then he says stories rolled in like beakers on a beach. First, a rubbish hit piece by a hack biographer of Paz, who said I'd thrown a tantrum before the wedding. Then a work of fiction about Meg making her staff miserable, driving them too hard, committing the unpardonable sin of emailing people early in the morning. According to him, she just happened to be up at that hour, trying to stay in touch with night owl friends back in America. She didn't expect an instant reply. He says that she also was said to have driven an assistant to quit. But in fact, that assistant had been asked to resign by Palace HR because Weedman showed evidence, says Harry, that this assistant had traded on her position with Meg to get freebies. I don't think that was the assistant trying to get freebies. We all know that Meg was over there handwriting letters in her quote-unquote magnificent calligraphy to these different fashion houses in order to get free things. If the assistant was doing it, it's because at Megan's bidding. Anyway, because we couldn't speak publicly about the reasons for the assistant's departure, rumors filled the void. In many ways, that was the true start of all the troubles. Shortly thereafter, the Duchess Difficult narrative began to appear in all the papers. I mean, the thing is, you only have to watch. I mean, there's just so many clips of Meghan just being dismissive and rude and just like with no class or manners, like all the time. All the time. You see her in interviews all the time, like being just unconscionably rude to people. Like the time she told that interviewer that she liked his stutter. What a rude thing to say to somebody. Like, what in the world? Now, we all know why she does these things. It's always a power play with her. But she thinks we don't notice? Anyway, she is a difficult person. She is difficult. Empirically, that person is hard to get along with. She would be somebody who you would never feel like you were on even ground in a discussion with her, because you'd always be trying to figure out, like, what's going on here? Okay. He goes on and on and on, saying everybody's coming out against Meghan. And the papers are reporting that Kate and Meg are not getting along. Somebody writes that Meghan had reduced Kate to tears about the bridesmaids' dresses. And of course, we all know it was the other way around. And this is just so much that I cannot get past. He says, I read this story in disbelief. Of course, Meg didn't. She still wasn't reading anything. She'd heard about it, however, since it was the only thing being discussed in Britain for the next 24 hours. And as long as I live, I never forget the tone of her voice as she looked at me in the eye and said, Has I made her cry? Her cry? Okay, so little put upon Meghan. She can't believe it. How could anybody say this? Everyone knows she had been the one on the floor crying. Okay, so now it's time to have a second summit with Willie and Kate, because this time, the first time wasn't enough. You know, when they were talking about, what about the Easter eggs and the place cards and all this trash? Apparently that hadn't fixed anything, shocker of all shockers. So they decided they're going to have another meeting, but this time on their turf, with their IKEA lamps and their sofa from sofa.com. He says that they all gathered in the little front annex of their apartment, and this time, there was no small talk. Kate got things rolling straight away by acknowledging that these stories in the papers about Meg making her cry were totally false. I know, Meghan, that I was the one who made you cry. Who believes that she said that? I sighed. Excellent start, I thought. I mean, Meghan might have been crying, but it was only because she was frustrated that she wasn't getting her own way. Meg appreciated the apology, but wanted to know why the papers had said this, and what was being done to correct them. In other words, why isn't your office standing up for me? Why haven't they phoned this execrable woman who wrote this story and demanded a retraction? Harry writes that Kate was flustered and didn't know how to answer, and then Willie chimed in with some very supportive sounding evasions, but of course he knew the truth. No one at the palace could phone the correspondent, because that would invite the inevitable retort. Well, if the story's wrong, what's the real story? What did happen between the two duchesses? And that door must never be opened, because it would embarrass the future queen. The monarch always, at all costs, had to be protected. There isn't any reason to correct this story. Who cares? Meghan, just continue to go out, do the right things, be a kind person. Eventually, that'll all die down. Who cares? Okay, so, I shouldn't say who cares. If I was being painted in the papers as this destructive human being, this absolute, Tasmanian devil who's coming in and wrecking everything, and I felt like it was unfair, I'm sure that I would want people to stand up for me. But at the same time, when are you going to move past these things? Like, when are you just going to be like, okay, this is really unfortunate. I really hate that this has come out. But I can't live my life in a past moment. They might have misunderstood what happened. The papers are misunderstanding me, but I'm just going to go out and I'm going to prove them wrong. That's all you can do at this point. Okay, so then they start talking about how, you know, how did the press even get this story? Like, that's the real question. You know, if none of us said anything, well, then how did it happen? Who amongst our people are just feeding bits of information to the press? Why did they really know that Meghan and Kate had a fight? Oh, but then all is revealed. We went around and around. The list of suspects became vanishingly small. Finally, Willie leaned back and conceded that, while we'd been on tour in Australia, he and Kate had gone to dinner with Pa and Camilla. And alas, he said sheepishly, we might have let it slip that there'd been a strife between the two couples. Okay, but so talking to Pa is now tantamount to leaking something to the press. You can't go to dinner with your dad and be like, man, things aren't right with us. Kate and I, Meghan and Harry, it's not the dream team we had all hoped that it would be. It's been really frustrating. You can't go to dinner with your dad and tell him this? I mean, so, like, I guess you can't talk to anybody. I put a hand over my face. Meg froze. A heavy silence. So now we knew. I told Willie, you, of all people, should have known. He nodded. He knew. More silence. It was time for them to go. What is the implication here? That if you tell Pa anything, then Camilla's going to hear, and then Camilla's going to run straight to the press? I mean, that's clearly the implication. That now, like, you can't talk to anybody. It's all just, hole up with your own little problems. No one can ever find anything out. Okay, so now we go on to a long little jag about all the destruction in the news and how they were constantly pitting Catherine and Meghan against each other. Okay, well, I do have this to say about that. There's a lot of comparison of the two women, and I think that's completely unfair. Well, it's unfair because, like, even before we decided we didn't like Meghan, don't compare women. Don't do that. Like, we do enough of that on our own. It would be horrible to have the press constantly coming at you and saying, oh, you wish you were as, long and lithe and beautiful as Catherine. Don't you wish you could pull clothes off that way? Catherine's waist is so small, yours is so thick. It's like, can you imagine? That would be so demoralizing. And Catherine is just so natural. What a winning spirit she has. And it would just be like, I'm not saying Meghan couldn't have made an effort. I'm not talking about personality at all. I'm just talking about physical appearances. There was a lot of comparison with the two women, and I think that that's tacky and tasteless. You don't need to compare women, right? So any stories in the press that were trying to pit those two against each other, I can understand being really aggravated about that. But Harry gives us some examples of how they would do that, and I think that he's missing the entire point of the stories. For example, he says that there was a story in the press that said that Meghan enjoyed avocado toast. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? What a dull story. It was not a great day in the news for that day. But she really likes avocado toast. She'd been, quote unquote, caught eating it. And the reason the press said this was so terrible is that harvesting avocados, according to them, was hastening the destruction of the rainforest, destabilizing developing countries, and helping to fund state terrorism. That's a lot riding on the back of an avocado. But then, of course, the same media had recently swooned over Kate's love of avocados. Oh, it makes Kate's skin glow, they said. Well, that's just a dumb story. I mean, really, truly, if that was in the press, talk about bow ring. But what I will say is, I think that what they might have been saying about Meg is, she's all the time, day long, talking about global propriety and taking care of the planet are big things for she and Harry, they say, as they jet around constantly and continually. But because she's always because she's always expressing this need for conservation and care for the planet, maybe they were just saying, okay, but if you really care about that, then you can't be hypocritical in your lifestyle choices. I think maybe that's what they were trying to say. I don't know. Now, probably not. Probably it was just, let's find something we can bash her with, and nobody wants to bash Kate, so who cares? But if we wanted to give it some sort of meaning, it may have just been like, you say you care about the planet, but then you're indulging in things that according to report, are harmful to the planet. Okay, so Harry says that it was no longer about two women fighting. It was no longer about two duchesses at odds, or even two households. Now the papers were saying that it was one person being a witch and causing everyone to run from her, and that one person was my wife. And he says that in building this super narrative, the press was clearly being assisted by someone or multiple someones inside the palace. But this is the thing. How can they get this narrative? If Meghan is this classy person that you say she is, like the last chapter he was talking about all these lovely, kind things she was doing for everybody, why weren't those reports coming out? Why wasn't anybody like, oh, she's so nice, she's like arranging ice cream socials? Like, by the way, who even does, what are you talking about? I also have a Sunday school party. Who's having an ice cream social? But whatever. And he said that she was bringing all sorts of gifts and presents to the depressed and sick people that were working in the office, and buying them lamps and heaters with her personal credit card. And he's saying she's doing all this. Okay, well, but if there's somebody in the palace who's leaking them stories, why aren't they ever leaking those things? Could it be because there's a plethora of other instances that are going down in which the kind thing she's doing just pale in comparison? Anyway, he says that there are just so many headlines all about Meg. This is what he says. One day it was, yuck, Meg's bra strap was showing, classless Meg. Next day, yikes, she's wearing that dress, trashy Meg. Next day, God save us, her fingernails are painted black, goth Meg. The next day, goodness, she still doesn't know how to curtsy properly, American Meg. And the next day, crikey, she shut her own car door, uppity Meg. You know, so the thing that is wild to me is why, again, I can only say this so many times, why would you keep reading it? Why would you invest your time? Why, like, it's just a bunch of trashy magazines. I fail to understand why anybody would ever invest any of their time in these dumb magazines. Anybody of worth doesn't read those. So if a bunch of trashy people want to read their trashy magazines and believe trashy things, okay, that's a whole subgroup of people. The people of substance and worth aren't going to believe those stories. So, and presumably those would be the people that you would want to spend your time with. So what do you care about this whole, you know, subculture of foolishness? That doesn't pertain to you. Move on. Okay, now we get to the part where they're finally going to get out of Not Caught. Praise be. And they say that it had really just, they got out of it, but only because Harry had to, you know, move heaven and earth and get Granny on the phone and tell her that the living conditions that she had set up for him were just substandard. That they had to rent a place in Oxfordshire because Not Caught, they just had to get away from that place. He claims that it was charming, so this is the first positive we've ever heard about it, but that it was so small and quite frankly was falling down around their heads. So he gets Granny on the phone and tells her that they need a new place to live because as it stands, they're having to rent somewhere because they can't even live in the home that they had. I mean, it's just nothing but, I mean, it's just a rubble heap is what it is. He says that he explained to Granny that Willie and Kate hadn't simply outgrown Not Caught, they'd fled it because of all the required repairs and the lack of room. And we were now in the same boat. Plus they had 2 rambunctious dogs and a baby on the way. So what you gonna do, Granny? Okay. That place you gave us, that cottage, I mean, it's just not good enough. 2 rambunctious dogs. Your dogs should not preclude you from living in a home. Like, it should not be like, I've got these 2 dogs and they're so wild that they're driving me out of my own home. Train your dogs then. What is this? I got 2 rambunctious dogs, I need a new home. What? What? You got 2 wild beasts running you right out of Not Caught? Okay. I guess 3 when you can consider Meghan's one of them. He says that they discussed different housing situations and they looked at several properties, but the thing is that some of them are just too grand. They had never been offered anything too grand in their lives. Too lavish, too expensive to renovate. Okay. Let me tell you something right now. If anything had been offered to them that was lavish, grand, and too expensive to renovate, they would have snapped that right up. They were never pinching their pennies, let me tell you. And so Granny says she's going to give it a thought, and then she says, what about Frogmore? And Harry's like, Frogmore, Granny, that place is huge. And she says, no, 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 Frogmore Cottage. So there's a little cottage on the grounds of Frogmore House. It's right near Frogmore House. And Granny said that it was sort of hidden. It was kind of tucked away. That originally had been the home of Queen Charlotte and her daughters. And it was a really lovely place. It was very historic, part of the Crown Estate. And it was very sweet. It would need some renovations, but she would be happy to take care of those. So that day they went, and Granny was right. The house really spoke to them. It was charming and it was full of potential. So they snatched that right up. And he thanked Granny profusely. And with her permission, they began to sit down with builders and started planning how they were going to renovate Frogmore Cottage. But then he writes this. He says that while the work was being done, they thought that they'd move to Oxfordshire full time. Remember, they had been renting that place because they, you know, as a reprieve from horrible Notcott, they'd had to actually rent a second establishment. And they thought they might move out there full time, you know, while they're waiting for the renovations, because they just loved it. The air was fresh, the verdant grounds, there was no paparazzi. He says also that they would be able to call on the talents of his father's longtime butler, Kevin. He knew the Oxfordshire house very well. And he'd be able to turn that house into a home. And so meanwhile, so basically what we're hearing right now is they are spending lavish amounts of money on restoring Frogmore Cottage to their standards. Meanwhile, they had a house at Notcott, but no, we're not going to stay there. We're going to also take up this other residence, waste other monies on this place in Oxfordshire, which we are also going to be refurnishing and making that place up to our standards with the help of Kevin, Pa's butler. And I just can't believe this. Like, that is so entitled. What's wrong with Notcott? You know, and now you've got, like, of course you were going to get a bigger home once you had a baby. The same thing had happened to William and Kate, although they'd had that baby while they were still at Notcott themselves. But as you climb in the ranks of the family, you are given better and better accommodations. Your time was coming. Yet you have to move out of Notcott to another side. I just can't even imagine. Can you imagine having a home and being like, meh, it's not good enough. We're going to rent somewhere else. P.S. Granny, we're going to need something besides this. What? And he just writes like it's all just, you know, just this thing. You know, just, I mean, it's, what were our options? What were our options? Okay, so he's talking about how much he loved Kevin, his dad's butler, and Kevin had always been really friendly with Mummy, and he tells this story, and I'm like, Harry is all the day long trying to pat himself on the back. He says that Kevin told him that he loved Mummy, and that Mummy was the only person in the family who ever dared venture below stairs to chat with staff. He says that, in fact, she'd often sneak down to sit with Kevin in the kitchen over a drink or a snack and watch television. Well, I think she's probably down there so she could eat. I mean, we know that she had some personal problems in the eating department, so I don't know if she was just down there to visit with staff, but okay. Kevin says that it had fallen to Kevin on the day of Mummy's funeral to greet Harry and Willie on their return to Highgrove. And he said that he stood on the front steps, he recalled, waiting for the car, rehearsing what he'd say to the boys. But when they pulled up and he opened the door, Harry retells that he had asked Kevin, "How are you holding up, Kevin?" Kevin says, "Oh, so polite." I mean, it really was just so lovely to Kevin that Harry would have asked him how he was doing. And Kevin says that he thought it was polite, and Harry says that when he hears that story, all he can think is how repressed he was as a youth. What a weird, braggy little story. Why did he tell us any of that? Why did he even bring Kevin up? Because Kevin, by the way, will never come up again. So, what is this? We needed a butler to redo our whole home. By the way, the butler liked Mummy. He said that Mummy was the only decent person in the royal family. Also, I'm awesome because I asked him how he was doing on the day of the funeral. What are these non-stories? All right. Anyway, it was all sunshine, light, rainbows, and gumdrop parties over there at Oxfordshire. But alas, of course, it couldn't remain because One day he got a phone. He looked down at his phone and there was a text from his team alerting him to a huge splashy story in the Sun and the Daily Mail. The Sun and the Daily Mail. These are the hills that we choose to die on. Anyway, he said that these stories were featuring a detailed overhead photo of Oxfordshire, and that in fact the helicopter had been hovering over the property. Paparazzi were hanging out at the door, aiming telephoto lenses at every window, including our bedroom, he says. So thus ended the dream of Oxfordshire. Well, I'm glad somebody ended that dream, because you didn't deserve it. What in the world were you doing in another home when you had a home and another one being renovated? How many places do you need to live in at once? How wild are your dogs? Okay, so, oh, Lord Jesus, here we come to another classic tale. Tales of tears on the floor, tales of tears on the stairs. She has elevated her position. She's now no longer prostrate on the floor. She has managed to crawl over and lay her weary head down on the stair tread. He said that he walked home from the office one day and found Meg sitting on the stairs. You know, still a non-traditional place to weep, and possibly weirder than the floor, because at least the floor is level. At this point, you're sad and laying on an unlevel surface. What is this? She's sobbing uncontrollably. Could she be crying any other way when he walks in? Never will he ever walk in and she's dabbing her eye with a Kleenex, but it's always sobbing uncontrollably. Sobs racking her body. My love, what's happened? I thought for sure we'd lost the baby. I went to her on my knees. The only way he's really ever allowed to approach her. She choked out that she didn't want to do this anymore. Do what? Live! And here we come to one of the densest moments in the book. It would be difficult to rank the densest moments that Harry has shown us, but this one might be number one. I didn't catch a meaning at first. I didn't understand. Maybe didn't want to understand. Probably. My mind just didn't want to process the words. It's all so painful, she was saying. What is? What are you talking about, Harry? Okay, first of all, you're the one that's constantly reading to her every single headline that has ever come out. And if she truly wasn't reading them, as you claim she wasn't, why would you constantly berate her with every negative thing that's been happening? And then you want to ask, what's the problem? What are you talking about? What can't you take? That's the only thing you two can ever bang on about. The paparazzi, the paparazzi, the paparazzi. And then you want to ask her, well, what's wrong? What's the matter with our life? Okay, anyway. It's too painful, she was saying. What is? To be hated like this. And for what? What had she done, she asked. She really wanted to know. What sin had she committed to deserve this kind of treatment? She just wanted to make the pain stop, she said. Not only for her, but for everyone. For me, for her mother, but she couldn't make it stop. So she decided to disappear. Now, what an interesting word she should choose, to disappear. The very word that he'd always thought of in connection to his mother, the 10 years after her death, that he refused to let it go. In fact, I think it was a lot longer than 10 years. Anyway, to say that she wants to disappear, that was a very carefully selected word, something that would really grip his heart with fear. But then she goes on to this ridiculous and unhinged statement, and if she really said this, she should have been committed, because she says that without her, she said, all the press would go away, and then I wouldn't have to live like this. Our unborn child would never have to live like this. So she's not only wanting to kill herself, but also to take the life of the child that is growing within her. I mean, that is so crazy. He should have immediately called a doctor. He should have called his therapist. This is when he should have called for help. If any part of him believed this at all, this is not a person that you can help in this moment. This is somebody who is telling you they want to commit suicide, and not only that, but to kill the child that she is carrying for you. Like, this is not somebody that you're like, oh, let's make sure we don't miss any engagements this evening, as we'll soon see. What is this play acting? What is this drama that they are letting unfold, and both of them pretending that this is reality? Because she doesn't mean it. She's not going to kill herself, as if. And he must not have believed it, because he's like, all right, carry on. None of this is a response you would have to somebody who is truly in crisis. It's so clear, she kept saying. It's so clear. Just stop breathing. Stop being. This exists because I exist. I just really pity the person who told her that she was an actress. Who in the world talks like this, even in a moment of crisis? What is this dialogue? This is some of the worst dialogue I've ever read. It's so clear. It's just so clear. Just stop breathing. Just stop existing. This exists because I exist. Like, what in the world is this soap opera dialogue? No, I begged her not to talk like that. I promised her that we'd get through it. We'd find a way. In the meantime, we'd find her the help she needed. I asked her to be strong. Hang on! But incredibly, while reassuring her and hugging her, I couldn't entirely stop thinking like a fucking royal. We had a sensible engagement that night at the Royal Albert Hall, and I kept telling myself, we can't be late. We cannot be late. They'll skin us alive, and they'll blame her. As well they should, because she's so busy carrying on this ridiculous scene, this ridiculous drama on the stairs. If you're late, it will be her fault, because this is when she chose to have her pretend meltdown. She was never going to kill herself. Please. Okay? Please. And you know why you couldn't entirely stop thinking like a royal? Because there was a part of your brain that went, this is wild. This is interesting timing. Well, I mean, yes, you couldn't stop thinking about reality, because there was a part of you that was like, all right, let's carry on. How much longer is this going to go on? You know? Because you knew it was all a con. I believe that there had to be a part of him that was just like, it's a lot of drama every time I come into this house. She's crying on the floor, crying on the stairs, rolling around, sobbing uncontrollably. I mean, at a certain point, the poor guy was probably like, all right, let's carry on, you know? Of course he has to give the impression that he believes every word that's falling out of her sobbing mouth, but did he really? Because if you really thought that this person was saying, I want to commit suicide, you would have been like, to hell with the royal engagement. I'm calling the doctor. I'm getting some help up in this place. I would call and say, we are having a massive mental health crisis over here. We cannot come. And to hell with what the paper said. If you really were like, it's life or death for my wife and my baby, who cares? But the thing is, you didn't really believe it was life and death. That's why you could continue to worry about the coming engagement. It's either that, or you're so dumb that you really thought that an engagement was more important than your wife's mental health. So both of those options, I mean, it leaves you in a sad spot. He suddenly realizes, he realizes, oh, we might have a real problem here. Maybe we shouldn't worry too much about this engagement tonight. And so he says, and this is how we know it was all a giant charade, because if somebody was really on the brink of killing themselves, they would be like nothing else would matter. If you were so distraught that you were thinking, I'm going to kill myself and my kid, you would not even give it another who cares what you have to do that night? You would be in such a crisis that you would not be able to immediately pull it together like she does in the following passage. So he writes, I said she should skip the engagement, of course. I needed to go and make a quick appearance, but I'd be home fast. Even this, what? No, she insisted. She didn't trust herself to be at home alone for even an hour with such dark feelings. Well, she managed to make it through the rest of the day while he was at the office. So we put on our best kit, and she applied dark, dark lipstick to draw attention away from her bloodshot eyes, and out of the door we went. The car pulled up outside the Royal Albert Hall, and as we stepped into the blue flashing lights of the police escort and the white-out lights of the press's flashbulbs, Meg reached for my hand. She gripped it tightly, as though that was anything different than she usually does. As we went inside, she gripped it even tighter. I was buoyed by the tightness of that grip. She's hanging on, I thought. Better than letting go. But when we settled into the royal box and the lights dimmed, she let go of her emotions. She couldn't hold back the tears. She wept silently. Probably because she was having to sit in a chair and not on the floor. The music struck up. We turned and faced the front. Spent the entire length of the performance squeezing each other's hands. Me whispering and promising, "Trust me, I'll keep you safe." All right, more bad news continues on after that. I mean, so we're just told that she's on the brink of killing herself. But, on to bigger and better things. He says that he got a text from Jason. More bad news. What is it now? The Mail on Sunday had printed a private letter that Meg had written to her father. The letter that Granny and Pa had urged her to write. Okay, before we even get into this, y'all, what is the deal? Who cares about this letter? Because it isn't as though the letter was something that was damning. It was just her writing to her dad saying, hey, this is really getting out of hand. I need you to stop going to the press. And of course we know now, as all was revealed about a year ago, that she and Jason had known the letter would eventually find its hands into the press. Now, how did she know that? I don't know. Did she send the letter to her father with a gigantic royal seal on the outside of the letter so that it could be apprehended by whoever happened to be putting the mail in the box? I don't know how she was so sure, but we know that she worded the letter so that it would tug at the heartstrings. Even the fact that she would call him daddy in the letter was designed to appeal to the public when they saw the letter. This was such a designed and theatrical episode in the life of Harry and Meghan. They released that letter knowing full well and hoping with all their hearts that the press would get it, because there's nothing wrong about it. That's the thing. And so their indignation after the letter is discovered and after the letter is published is the weirdest thing about the story. Nothing about the letter should have been that big of a deal from their perspective. Now, from the rest of the world, we're looking at it and we're going, what is this letter? Like, what? I mean, because it was just really, quite frankly, it was crafted so poorly. Half of the things that she's saying in that letter, and I'm not going to waste time to read it, but you all know what was in the letter. So many of the things that she says are just, it's just rambling. Like, she could have said all of that so much more concisely, so much more beautifully, so much more eloquently. She wanted to show off that ridiculous handwriting. Now, okay. Oh, we'll get to it. I've got some thoughts on it. And she's, okay, well, you just got to keep on. So he gets the text. Meg's in bed. She's asleep. He lets her sleep for a little bit longer, but he just can't wait to tell her the bad news. So he says he waited a bit, and then he broke the news to her softly. Your father's given your letter to the Daily Mail. No. Meg, I don't know what to say. He's given them your letter. That moment for me was decisive about Mr. Markle, but also about the press. There'd been so many moments, but that for me was the one. I didn't want to hear any more talk protocols, tradition, strategy. Enough, I thought. Enough. So he's just like absolutely incensed that this had happened. And he says that it was illegal for the paper to publish the letter, and they know it full well, but they did it anyway. Well, if it's illegal, then how did they do it? They knew that Meghan didn't have the staunch support of the family, says Harry. And how else could they have known this except from people close to the family or inside the family? The papers knew that the only recourse Meg had was to sue. And she couldn't do that because there was only one lawyer working for the family, and that lawyer was under the control of the palace, and the palace would never authorize him to act on Meg's behalf. So he claims that's how the paper got away with it. But here's the thing. Meghan couldn't sue them because then it would come out that she knew full well that the letter was going to be leaked and had hoped that it would be. So, of course, that's why they couldn't sue. Because they had no grounds on which to do so. He admits that, there was nothing in the letter to be ashamed about. It was a daughter's pleading with her father to behave decently. And Meg stood by every word. And she'd always known that it might be intercepted. That one of her father's neighbors or one of the paps staking out the house might steal his post. Anything was possible. But she'd never stopped to think her father would actually offer it, or that the paper would actually take it and print it. Why wouldn't you think that your dad would do that when you're the one that's telling us that every turn of the way he's got this, kindred and intimate relation with the paparazzi? If you thought that was going to happen, then why in the world did you send him a letter in the first place? Just because you claim that you did it because the Queen told you to do it? Why don't you do a video call with your dad? There's any number of things you could have done that would not have been intercepted. But again, Since you stand by every word of it and there's nothing to be ashamed about it, then why are you wringing your hands and pulling your hair out in angst and indignation that this horrible thing has come down upon you? Wouldn't you want the press to see you talking to your dad? Of course you did. So why even play act that you're mad? That's the thing I don't understand. What is up with all the play acting? What is up with all, I mean, it's like, is your life not exciting enough as a royal that you have to inject all of this false hysteria? Is there not enough to do? All right, so, I mean, can you imagine? Get a couple of charities. Find something to use your time with. All right, so she's all mad about it. And then, of course, the final indignation was how everybody didn't like her handwriting. And everybody, you know, there was all sorts of conversation about the handwriting. And the handwriting experts said all sorts of things, like how she had a rightward slant. That meant she was over-emotional. Highly stylized, consummate performer. Uneven baseline, no impulse control. Okay. As a person who actually did do a little calligraphy in my time, and I have to say that I was a little bit shocked by what she called calligraphy. It was stylized handwriting at best, but it was not calligraphy. And she does not have excellent penmanship, as she goes on to say that she does. She says, and oh my Lord, this whole passage, I mean, I absolutely about rolled my eyes out of my head. The look on Meg's face as I told her about how these libels were rolling out. First of all, why are you telling her? If you're like, the look on her face was so devastated. You did that to her by telling her. I knew my way around grief, and there was no mistaking it. This was pure grief. But then you're as bad as the press. If these things are hurtful, and they're being published, and you're mad that these hurtful things are being published, why are you reading them to your wife? Why are you grinding salt into what you say is a wound? I don't understand that. How is that protection? Okay. So on to this paragraph. She was mourning the loss of her father, and she was also mourning the loss of her own innocence. That is incoherent. What are you talking? Mourning the loss of her innocence? Was she just raped? What are you talking about? What are you mourning the loss of her father and her innocence? What is the context for the loss of innocence? Explain this to me. But he doesn't. She reminded me in a whisper, as if someone might be listening, that she'd taken a handwriting class in high school, and as a result, she'd always had excellent penmanship. People complimented her. She'd even used this skill at university to earn spare money. Nights, weekends, she inscribed wedding and birthday party invitations to pay the rent. And now people were trying to say that this was some kind of window into her soul, and the window was dirty. Okay, I legitimately did do wedding invitations, and it is a tough market because there are people who have excellent handwriting, and hers would not have made the cut. Let me tell you, when you go into a wedding invitation shop, and they hand you the binder, and it's full of people's samples, and you can choose which of those samples you want and which calligrapher you want to work with. Hers would never have even made the cut to go in that binder. I mean, like, who are all these people with weddings and birthdays that would want that scrawl on their official wedding invitation? They wouldn't want it because it is uneven. It's undecided. It's flourishy. It's the baseline isn't even. There's no consistency. I'm not saying that maybe like a friend of hers wasn't like, you know, to save a couple bucks was like, hey, could you do my wedding invitations or whatever? But I'm telling you, she wasn't paying the rent on it. Her handwriting isn't good enough for her to have been able to charge people enough for her to have been able to pay the rent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Again, I'm not saying that she doesn't, you know, have nice penmanship. She has interesting penmanship. It's probably better than most, but it's not something anyone would have paid for, and nobody would have hired her for it. That's all I'm saying. All right. Now, there was one letter that had come out in The Guardian, or not one letter, but one article that had come out in The Guardian saying that tormenting Meghan Markle had become a national sport that was shaming them. And Harry says it was true, but no one seemed to feel ashamed of it, and so nothing was changing. Meg inexplicably wanted to sue over this letter, and so did Harry. Again, why would you sue when you are totally fine with what you said? Like, if you've got nothing to hide, who cares? And they said that they both felt that they had no choice. If they didn't sue over this, what kind of a signal would that be sending to the press and to the world? So they conferred again with the palace lawyer. But they kept getting the runaround, they say. And what they couldn't understand was that Pa had sued before, and Willie had sued before. Pa had sued over these black spider letters, these so-called black spider letters that were memos to his government officials. And Willie had sued, says Harry, over topless photos of Kate. But both of them vehemently opposed the idea of Meg and Harry taking any legal action, and he couldn't understand why. Well, I'll tell you why. Because a letter that you're not ashamed of is nothing to sue over. It may be an inconvenience to you. You may dislike the fact that it had been handed over to the press because it feels like an intrusion. But again, you expected that that would happen. So if you expected it, then why are you suing over it? If you didn't want that to happen, then why did you feed something to the beast? That doesn't make sense. And again, a letter that you're not ashamed of is completely different than Catherine without a top on. Those are not the same circumstances, and you cannot equate the two. And no one will ever side with you and be like, oh, that's really unfair that William was allowed to sue the paper over topless photos of Catherine, yet you can't sue over a letter that you aren't ashamed of. Oh, my Lord. That wasn't where I wanted us to stop. I actually had so much more, but I talked too long about things. And I really can't go longer than an hour because I don't have the time to edit more than 1 hour. And as you can see, it's been a rough editing job of late. But I think we truly are going to have to stop there. Okay, so that's where we've ended. We've ended with the letter. And when we come back together, we will be talking about the famous dog bowl incident. We're going to start with the dog bowl incident. So stay tuned for that. Well, it's been a pleasure. And I will see you again later this week. Gotta go back to school on Monday. It's been a lovely week being off. Went by too fast. But anyway, I'll see you later this week, and we'll talk all about the dog bowl incident, as though we haven't heard enough about it, but maybe I'll have something fresh to say. I doubt it, but maybe I will. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.